Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the next panel session, which is going to be on Māori business. I'll just briefly introduce the panellists who are going to be speaking on the different business opportunities and through to trade policy in Southeast Asia. To my right, I have Dr. Brian Tunui from Victoria University of Wellington, the newest recruit to Auckland University, Dr. Jason Mika at the International Business and Management School, your own Indigenous trade policy expert, Tane Waitford, and down the end, Wahine Māori entrepreneur, Nichola Kiri. Before we start, I do just want to echo the sentiment that Deborah said before, just about the importance of bringing diverse perspectives together. And I think it's really great here on this panel that we have the business, the policy, and the academic voices here to really kind of highlight some of those opportunities and kind of catalyse change in these conversations. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nichola to start your presentation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Carrie. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko maunga pohatu te maunga, ko taurana te awa, ko tūhoi te iwi, no waimana hau, engari kei kirikiri roi noho ana. Ko Nichola Kiri tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Nichola and I hail from a town called Waimana, but I've born and raised in Hamilton. I am the CEO, the founder, creative director, content creator, fashion designer, you name it, I do it, of my business, NTK Made Limited. And I'm going to just start us off with a little video that I have prepared earlier in regards to my experience in Southeast Asia. The best part of tonight was actually how well the audience received our culture. I was so proud and pleased when our team were performing. I thought that was amazing. And I could feel the ihi, the wihi, the wana. It was just really awesome to see that the team and that the audience were just so impressed. They understood the narrative and they were understanding what I was trying to achieve, and that was really, really awesome.
I really like it. Actually, like have the similar like a fusion with the Thai. I see one top was very nice. I really like it.
Each piece is mastered very well. How the different cuts will shape people differently here, and how we can have both cultures collaborate together.
Next steps are definitely to follow up on some leads that we've made and to build a much stronger customer base. So I've got a pocket full of business cards that I'm hoping to follow up with, and yeah, just to see where those things lead to. Thanks. So that video was just a little bit about an event that I organised and ran in Thailand, in Bangkok, in October this year. And if I take a step back, I'm actually a product of CCAPES, so Southeast Asia Centre of Asia Pacific Excellence. I was fortunate enough to go on a couple of trips to Thailand and Malaysia under Professor Sia Wee Hang. And when I was away on those trips, there was one major one that we went to, and Nichola was a key part in that trip, was we did a Matariki charity event while over there. And it was at this event that I had some garments as part of the charity process and up for auction, and it was at that moment in time that my garments were auctioned off and sold. But it was actually the connections that I made with the ladies that bought those garments that made me a little light in my head go, hey, there might be a possible viable market here in Thailand for myself and my business. And it was from that moment that I started to grow the connections for me being a Pākehī Māori, whakawhanaungatanga and hononga are very important, and very important in who I am as a person, very important as me as a wahine Māori, but also as a Pākehī Māori. Connections and fostering and looking after those connections are really, really important. So from that point, I developed this crazy idea that I would come back and we would run a little fashion event with some of these awesome, amazing people that I met and that I went back to visit, because that first trip that I went on was in 2023. And in October, so the event that you just saw on the video was actually a group project. It wasn't just about my brand going into the Thai market and testing and validating whether it's viable. We also took a ropu of us. There was 16 altogether as part of Te Hononga Kiwa, but we called Ngā Hononga Kiwa, which is the alumni of Te Hononga Kiwa. And the trip, you've only seen a snippet of the business side of things, but the trip was so much more than that. We connected with Indigenous communities. We stayed out in a village up in the Chiang Mai Hills, which was actually really life-changing, and it was quite a big culture shock initially for me. But my highlight of that trip was working in the rice fields and harvesting. So nothing to do with business, but it's all part of it though. For me as a Māori, that's how I operate. We need to make connections with the people, the tangata whenua of the space, to kind of really understand and build where we can see similarities and things like that. In regards to the business side of that trip, as you saw, yes, there are definite leads that I have followed up on and we are doing. In fact, we're working on a collaborative project with a ropu or a group from ASEAN in regards to making Thai and Māori fused some merchandise for a project that is a social good project. It's only in the initial stages at the moment, but that's what it's all about for me, is planting the seeds and building on it and gaining momentum through that. I really do love Southeast Asia, and I'm finding that I'm loving Thailand more and more purely because I feel there's a real strong connection of manaakitanga, which means, looking after people, looking after one another. And I've always felt that when I've been there. So, that is my kōrero and my connection and how I'm doing in that space in Southeast Asia. Kia ora.
The boring government official shouldn't follow the creative. Right. My deficiencies are exposed, and I feel very, very out of place. If I can tūtahi tēnā koutou katoa, kei te miatu ki a koutou, ko tai I tēnei rā. Welcome everyone who is here. Huri no te tai tukarau me te whakatōhia ko tāne Waipapa ingoa. My tribal affiliations are to the north and to the eastern Bay of Plenty, and it's a pleasure to be here. I also do want to acknowledge what Carrie said at the beginning and what Deborah spoke to earlier on about the value of these get-togethers. This, I believe, is the 6th year, and I've attended most of those years except for the COVID one. And it's been great to see Māori business feature in each of those editions. And I feel very privileged to be on the panel today, although very much out of place. I'm just going to cover off briefly some recent developments in trade policy development, trade negotiations in relation to Māori and Indigenous trade. But to set the scene, and in particular what MFAT has been doing with other government agencies, but to set the scene, it really is around why this matters. And I'll start off with a quote. Māori want to have higher incomes, Māori want to have better housing. Māori want better access to healthcare in a timely, quality way. They want to achieve better education results that set their future up in a much better way, to access higher paying jobs. All of those things are common to all New Zealanders. That was the Prime Minister on Wednesday morning. Trade can play a role in achieving those things. It is about better opportunities, better quality of life, redressing, rebalancing, reclaiming. It is about mana, the ability to be able to exercise mana. And for Māori, it comes with additional obligations and responsibilities to provide for the broader collective, to uphold duties and responsibilities that are transferred through generations, and to set future generations up for a better future. But Māori face significant challenges in redressing and rebalancing past inequities or current inequities from past actions. And I did want to give an example, drawing on my whakatohia tribal heritage around the impacts of dispossession and what's being done now to address some of that. And so my mother, my preferred side of course, is from Whakatohia or Pōtiki. Her tribal area is Ōpape. Our Whakatohia people were rich. They had very strong agricultural programs. They traded to Auckland when Auckland became the capital, as European and British settlers in particular established there. There was a shipping, trading routes between Ōpōtiki and Tamaki. At one point in time, every Whakatohia man had visited Auckland as part of those trade links. Rich in kumara, potatoes, vegetables, apples, peaches, horses, cattle, pigs, poultry. We even had a flour mill built in 1861. This ideal of Whakatohia prosperity was shattered by the military invasion in 1865 as foraging parties plundered at will the property to feed the 500 invaders. One of the lieutenants wrote, "Pork chops, beefsteaks, fowls, and everything was good. In the village we found potatoes enough to feed an army. Pigs and cattle were swarming around. I remained on shore for 5 days after the village was taken, during which time I had glorious fun." A major wrote, "All their ploughing was done with horses. A bullock was never seen working here. I should say they were very rich. Ploughs brand new, all sorts of implements. I have a washstand, iron bedstead, table, chair, and so have lots of others. The force has got thousands worth of property belonging to Whakatohia." And another lieutenant wrote, "We have lots of furniture. We have secured over 20 horses. I have a well-bred mare. She is about 10 years old. What a beautiful place this is." Whakatohia has suffered the impacts of that dispossession for decades. But we've seen a turn in fortune. So for about 20 years, there was a vision, a dream to develop open sea mussel farming. That was done in the early 2000s. Consent processes went through. They managed to acquire capital injection from various investors, including Māori business, Pākehā business, trusts, corporations, and then there was a significant provincial growth capital injection to turn that dream into a reality. It is now a multi-million-dollar company. It has its own processing plant. It's open sea. And those who have visited the East Coast or the eastern part of the Bay of Plenty, it is beautiful water. have about 3,800 hectares of open sea mussel farming. They employ around 200 people with the aim of growing that to 280 people, all locals. And another significant development happened earlier this year in June when Whakatohia completed their treaty settlement. It took over 30 years and it was a very difficult one for Whakatohia. That settlement includes an apology, quote, to ngā uri o te Whakatohia, the descendants of Whakatohia, who have lived with economic, cultural and spiritual loss and deprivation as a result of the Crown's actions, and it includes a $100 million compensation package. So these are just some of the examples around how inputs are supporting tribal regeneration, economic regeneration, and trade plays a role, or can play a role in all of that. And it is repeated around the country. We know that the Māori economy is valued at about 70 billion, and that is based on 2018 data. But when you lift the lid on all of that, it's actually quite a complex map of systems and structures and processes, tribal assets, individual, collective, corporations and trusts. And of that, about a third of that 70 billion, around a third is tied up in agriculture. So about 33 billion. I wanted to just briefly, mindful of the time, to sort of briefly cover off what's been done in recent years on trade policy to support the Māori economy. It might read a little bit like a report card. That's not the intention, but significant developments and improvements have taken place. So since 2001, we have included the Treaty of Waitangi exception in all FTAs. In recent times, however, in particular since the TPP and the CPTPP, there has been an intensification in Māori trade engagement, participation and partnerships. Māori have made very clear their expectations around what they want to see in trade agreements and how they see themselves in that process and in those outcomes. So, in recent times, trade negotiators have specifically chased the best possible market access deals, including, crucially, entry into force so that Māori can benefit from those trade agreements as soon as possible. We've seen some outcomes on manukahani, environmental protections, data protections, an emphasis on wahine Māori, an emphasis on services, in the UK FTA protecting kamate, dedicated Māori and Indigenous trade and economic cooperation chapters in the FTA with Chinese Taipei, UK, EU, more recently with the UAE. And there is a standalone, world-first open plurilateral Indigenous peoples economic and trade cooperation arrangement. I think that these developments are possible for two specific reasons. Number one, strong Māori leadership, and number two, an enabling environment. And that enabling environment has been supported and created and enabled through strong leadership. And on that note, I do want to acknowledge Vangeli Vitali, who has fronted, for better and for worse, for good and for bad, those very challenging and difficult processes and conversations, and the structures that have, and the resourcing that has enabled stronger Māori participation. And I know my colleague will talk a little bit about, my good friend Jason will talk a little bit about the mahi around indigenising trade policy. The crucial bit now is how we take advantage of the opportunities through implementation and through leveraging. I might conclude with one of my favourite career stories, experiences. I had the pleasure of working closely with Te Aroha Trust around about 10 years ago, and the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon visited New Zealand after the SIDS conference in Samoa, and he had time to do one activity, and that one activity he did was visit Te Aroha in Taupo. It is a wonderful venture. I won't go into all of the details. It is a Māori trust. And so we were on the bus driving out to Mokai Valley, which is west of Tauport. And as we're driving along, those who know Tauport, there are pipes and vents and steam everywhere. And the Secretary General turned to the wonderful Tumanoko Wereta, who was guiding us, and said, "Is that steam?" And Tumanoko returned, "That's money." Kia ora koutou.
I te puere I ngā rau toa, arahina tō iwi e. Tō ngā ki ngā taonga o tipuna, te waru o te ariki. Kia koutou katoa e ngā rangatahi, te oranga mo te ao katoa. Kia mau, kia kaha pupuri tia, te mano te ariki. Because you're magic people to me, you're magic people to me. Hold your heads up high, let your voices fly, be proud to be Māori. Because you're magic people to me, you're magic people to me. Hold your heads up high, let your voices fly, be proud to be Māori. Be proud to be Māori. Be proud to be Māori. Nō reire hoa mā, mōrena koutou. Aroha mai, I'm still coming down off the high of our hikoi on Tuesday. And so, if you'll bear with me, I just wanted to make a couple of comments in relation to that, and I hope that that some of you were able to witness the hikoi on Tuesday. Just briefly, in 2004, when the foreshore and seabed hikoi took place, I was actually living and working in Singapore at the time. And to say that I had serious FOMO would be putting it lightly, but not this time around. Tuesday was historic. We saw the magic of some of our culture on display. It was led by our future. And when I talk about our future, I talk about our rangatahi, our tamariki and mokopuna. They were the ones that organised our hikoi, and it was truly historic. I was so proud of the way that our people conducted themselves with dignity, with respect, humility, and so peacefully. They understood the significance of that event. And in talking with Jason yesterday, Jason drove down to Wellington Monday evening, took part in the hikoi, he and his wife, and then they drove back after the hikoi on Tuesday. And so that, I think, reflects what it meant for Māori on Tuesday. And the interesting thing is that this moment was witnessed all around the world. All around the world. And what better advertisement for Māori and for Indigenous peoples than that? So, hoi anō, I better get on to the kaupapa. And so, my name is Brian Tunui. I'm a lecturer at Victoria University in Wellington within Māori Studies. I've come to academia a little bit later than others. My background is in and around finance investment. And so, as I mentioned, in 2004, I was living and working in Singapore, was managing a subsidiary company for HSBC back in the day. But prior to that, I was living in the Cook Islands and was working for a large British bank called Standard Chartered. And why would Standard Chartered why would they have an office in the Cook Islands? Well, there was a little piece of legislation which allowed them to create a tax haven. And so 1 July 1997, for those of you I can see, 1 July 1997 was when Hong Kong went back to the PRC. And so there were a number of very wealthy, and many of them Hong Kong Chinese, who were setting up offshore trusts in order to protect their assets. And so we were doing a lot of that business in the Cook Islands itself. Now, during this time, I was travelling to Singapore, to Indonesia, Jakarta, and into Hong Kong. It was a services business, and so I was kind of peddling our wares at the time to clients within that Southeast Asia region. And so one of the key observations over that 10-year period in travelling and working and living in the Pacific and in Asia was that culture matters. Culture does matter. Why does it matter? It matters because from our perspective, from a Māori perspective, our culture enables us to get into the minds and hearts of our customers, and so it's an opening, it's an opportunity, and so that gives us the first step into a relationship. And there's a guy called Carl Wixon from New Zealand Story Inc. who talks about making a cultural connection in order to make a commercial connection. Making a cultural connection in order to make a commercial connection. And so the key takeaway for me over that 10-year period was, if we're seeking to do business in these countries, we need to understand the culture of the people that we want to do business with. That's critical and that's important, and I was just talking to Nichola about that again this morning, and she reconfirmed that for me. As a part of my PhD thesis, Waka Incorporation, which is a food and beverages business based out of Nelson, I was interviewing Karen's Johnston, who's the CEO, and she said to me that whenever people want to do business with Waka, first of all, she will interview them as the CEO, because she needs to understand whether they are people that they want to develop a long-term relationship with. And so that's quite critical. And for those of you who might know Waka Incorporation, they have a 500-year plan. I can't get my head around that, but they have that. And so, relationships are so important. And in terms of vice versa, and I was talking to Nichola this morning about reciprocity, which is an important tikanga for us within Māoridom. Do we talk to our potential clients and say, well, actually, are there opportunities for you in New Zealand and Aotearoa? So it's a two-way relationship. I forgot to announce my whakapapa right at the beginning, so I'll just kind of circle back to that later on at the end. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was Potama Trust. And I see my former colleague, Rachel Maidment here. And so in 2010, when Minister Sharples took a trade delegation to China, and as a part of that, when he came back, we had been working individually with businesses. Potama Trust is a Māori business development trust, which provides funding for small to medium-sized Māori enterprises. And it was something that spun out of the 1984 Hui Taumata, which was a Māori economic development held in 1984. And Koro Wetere, who was the Minister of Māori Affairs at the time, called that. And Potama spun out of that in order to help small to medium-sized enterprises. Over the years, Jason has done research for us as well in that space. But after that visit, we formed clusters, and we have a tourism cluster, a seafood cluster, a red meats cluster, a honey cluster. And so it was bringing these businesses together to be able to socialise and to network together, and then also to go overseas as a collaboration, and having that kind of critical mass, I suppose, as opposed to doing it individually. One of the things that we did find, though, is that at the end of the day, we were looking or seeking to develop kind of a brand in and around some of these organisations, but at the end of the day, they wanted to retain their own brands, and we respected that. And when we were providing advice to these clusters, we had Rachel who came in and was providing us with promotional material as well as intellectual property advice in relation to those businesses. And I'm pleased to say that today Rachel is a trustee on the Taumata Trust and continues that work. Also, just as of interest, another former colleague of yours, Koro Nia Dickinson, is our CEO for Taumata Trust, and so Taumata Trust still has very much that sort of focus in terms of helping our businesses overseas. I also wanted to mention that we have Kiwa Whataro from New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, who has helped us into those areas as well. Finally, just in finishing, I just wanted to touch a little bit on tikanga in business, and the fact that for many years tikanga has operated in the shadows, but in the last 20 to 30 years it has re-entered this particular space in terms of business and commerce. Our Māori organisations are implementing tikanga into their business models and into their business operations. And one of our kaumātua, Herenga Moko Mead, says that people can learn a lot from our tikanga. As our businesses, as our commercial organisations are gaining more confidence with the use of tikanga within their business models, there are a number that are experimenting and trialling different tikanga. And so as they become more confident and as we become more competent in our businesses, I believe only then can we fully realise that potential of our tikanga within our commercial businesses. I guess in closing, it's important for us to understand the role of culture and how important that plays a role in trade. For Māori, it enabled us to make a cultural connection in order to make a commercial connection. And as Tane mentioned earlier on about the sailing ships and the flour mills, Hazel Petrie wrote a book about the golden era of the Māori economy. And she describes the era of the early 19th century as the golden era of the Māori economy. I kind of wonder if she may have jumped the gun a little bit. And I believe that the full potential of tikanga within our economy and within our businesses is yet to come. And I would ask that you watch out for its growing influence in terms of the New Zealand economy. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, toi tū te triti, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Tūtahi, ka mihi a hau, ki te hau kaina, nā te whāti o Warākei, koutou mā, e pupuri tonu i te mana o tēnei whenua. Ka nui te mihi ki te whare wānanga nei, Waipapa Taumata rau, tēnā koutou, mena ki nei ia tātou i tēnei rani. Ko ai a hau, ko pare kohe te mauna, ko hene mataro te awa, ko waikirikiri te marae, ko hāmua te hapu, tūhoi te iwi, tērā, no Ngāti Pukeko, Ngāti awa, anō hoki a hau, no poroporo, te tahi wāhi pakupaku no iho, kai whakatāne, te tahi taha anō, no te whakatōhia, tēnei taha, o marumutu, te marae i reira, Tētahi anō taha no nā te kaungunu ki te wairoa, ko Erepeti Marae, kei tērā taha. Ko Jason Mika hau. Kia ora everyone. Last time I was holding a microphone in my hand, I was singing YMCA, Village People, at Hopu Hopu with Carrie and a whole bunch of other people who were sort of thinking and dreaming about indigenising trade policy as part of a 5-year research program that secured about $15 million worth of funding. So it's a big project, and so what happens when you have a big project? Well, you get together, you have a hui, like this, pretty much like this, except there was, what I love is karaoke. And so one way to break the ice is karaoke. And anyone who's been to Japan or, over Asia, what are you going to do? You're going to hang out, get to know each other. How do you do that? Sing a song. Māori love to sing songs, anei tēnei taha. And so it was just beautiful. So I'm not going to break out into YMCA just yet. I'll save that for you fellas, so you can do that later. But I just wanted to acknowledge also each and every one of you, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, for the work that you do. I've had the opportunity to interview quite a few of you and work with you on various kaupapa, whether it's free trade agreements with the United Kingdom, European Union, or the CPTPP, and the ASEAN Trade Academy, stuff like that. So just been really privileged to interact with you. And I understand, I have some appreciation, I don't really understand, I have an appreciation of your job, how influential your work is. So I think this opportunity here to share a little bit about Māori business, Indigenous business, what Nichola does, all the mahi, and Nichola, all of the Māori business people, what they do is important, that you have an appreciation of that, so that when you're sitting at the negotiating table trying to get us the best deal possible, you know kind of what the expectation is, what the aspiration is, and what good looks like in terms of Māori economy, Māori enterprise. And so I really appreciate the work that you do. So no pressure, yes, no pressure, but we want good, we want great deals for our Māori people, our Māori economy, our Māori enterprises. So tērā. I guess for me, the things that I just want to briefly comment on, one is that the research program that we're doing, which is called Tauhokoko. Then I'm just going to briefly comment on the ASEAN Trade Academy, which is another little project which we're fortunate to do at Waka University in conjunction with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And then the last thing is probably just to do with this idea of culture and commerce, which is what the Whanauna Brian has talked about. So I guess one of the challenges of tauhokoko is to think about the purpose of tauhokoko. Tauhokoko means trade in Māori. It's trying to imagine what would trade policy look like if we kind of, we're all sitting in a marae in Whakatane, locked in the marae, thinking about, well, if we design trade policy, if we design trade agreements from a Māori perspective, with Māori values, Māori aspirations, Māori capabilities and potentials, what would it look like? What would it look like in terms of both the content, the process, and the outcome of trade policy? And so that's the challenge of tauhokoko. And one of the key focus of it, one of the key aims is mana motuhake. How does Indigenous trade enable mana motuhake? Now, mana motuhake, it's getting a bit of bad rap these days, but it's actually a good thing. It is. Mana motuhake, te mana motuhake o tūhui, all right? Po tātou wera. It's really about enabling people to be self-determining, to have their own choices, to choose to look after themselves and have the capacity and potential to do so. And so we want to test the idea that, okay, how does Indigenous trade enable Māori to do that? To provide prosperous communities, whānau, whenua, wai, for themselves and others. And then the other thing is, it's not just about economics, not just about the money, not just about doing business. It's about the impact on well-being of people, of land, of water, of air, of the elements, because that's us too. We belong to that, and it belongs to us. And so with Indigenous trade, how does it impact well-being? The other metric is, how does it benefit people? How does trade, in particular, benefit communities, whether they're in Whakatane, Whakatohea, or Auckland? So that's another important metric. The other one is climate, climate change. So how does Indigenous trade impact or benefit or affect or mitigate the effect of climate change? So, yeah, that's a big project. There's 3 basic aims. One is indigenising trade policy, which Robert Joseph is leading. The other one is measuring Indigenous trade, which Matt Roskridge from Massey is leading. So we want to measure trade data using this thing called the GTAP. Anyone heard of GTAP? You fellas know GTAP, eh? This big database over in the US. The fellow who built that thing is working with us, Erwin Korong. And so they're figuring that out. Then the other one is enabling Indigenous trade, which is the business. So how do Māori and Indigenous people do business internationally, and how are they supported to do so? What kind of support mechanisms, whether it's Pautama Trust, Trade and Enterprise, or Māori business networks like Whāriki, or other groups and other institutions and other forms of support. What works to enable Indigenous business internationally? And that's the bit I'm looking after. Now, just recently I moved from Waikato University to Auckland University about 2 weeks ago, so I'm a bit of a newbie here. One of the things is I had to leave that project behind. I wanted to leave it behind, so I did, and because that's where it was born. And so we had to find a new leader for that project, and fortunately, we've got a former Minister of Foreign Affairs sort of hanging out just up the street from the management school, and we approached her, and she says, yes, I'd like to have a crack at that, Jace. Oh, kia ora there. So that's the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta. So thankfully she's taken that up, so I can come to Auckland and get up to some new mischief, some new projects over here in the business school. So that project is underway. The second thing I just briefly want to mention is the ASEAN Trade Academy. It's my first time to Southeast Asia in June. It was awesome. Jakarta, what an incredible city that is. There's just everyone's on a moped or on a nifty 50 or something. There's the granny, the mum, the babies, and the mokopuna at the back, all on a 50cc motorcycle. And there's thousands of them. It's awesome. So we spent a week there working. And my part in that project was to explain what Indigenous trade looks like from a Māori perspective. And the thing with it, our foreign affairs contacts, they says, well, Jace, Indigenous trade looks different over there. They think about Indigenous peoples different in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia. And I said, how's that? And they says, well, there's lots of Indigenous people there, there's lots of ethnic groups there, and so they have, it's complicated. And it wasn't until I got there that I realised how complicated it is. There's 300 Indigenous peoples there, and they've got languages for Africa, and it is complicated because they've got big history there. So what I learned from that is that what we think about and how we approach Indigenous development and Indigenous peoples in Aotearoa, Australia, Canada, US, where we sort of kind of tend to hang is very different in Southeast Asia. And so we need to understand what that looks like and what that means and find a connection, a commonality. The third thing is culture. Excuse me, culture is a competitive advantage for our firms, particularly our Māori enterprises, but all firms that kind of sort of have the potential, if they do it right, to engage in the world in terms of doing business internationally with Southeast Asia, using culture as a competitive advantage. It's our strength. And it's not just in terms of forming relationships, manaakitana, whanaunatana, establishing those connections with one another. It's how we do business, how you actually manage your firm in a sustainable, culturally appropriate, culturally safe manner. So it's not just the connection, it's the way in which you run your firm and why you do business. A lot of Māori firms are sort of, the business second. Priority is whānau, family well-being. So the business exists to support whānau. It's a whole different way of thinking. And I think it's appealing to others. Yes, got to be profitable, commercially viable, productive, cash flow, net positive. All those important things are vital. But it's how we conduct business is really a strength for our country and our firms. And so we need to understand what that looks like and how we enable it through policy and also capacity development. I'll probably leave it there. Kia ora.
I just want to thank the panellists for all their incredible insights, and I do just have a few comments that I just want to make to kind of tie it all together. I also realised I forgot to introduce myself at the start of the panel, so kia ora koutou, Carrie Stoddart-Smith tōku ingoa. The point about the different perspectives coming about Indigenous people in Southeast Asia, that's across the world. We come across, different cultures have all those different perspectives. But I think it links to the importance of why entities like the CAPES initiatives and APEC forums and the Asian New Zealand Foundation at being able to kind of build culture-to-culture connections and also take businesses on that journey and connect them into those markets in ways that work for Māori businesses and ways that work for the people they're engaging with overseas. I want to touch on the hikoi too, because when we think about te tiriti, that, it affects every sphere of our life. And I think when we're thinking about, what did that demonstrate? It had a demonstration globally that gave notice to the world about what Māori's position is on the treaty. But it also gave notice to our trading partners that you guys are going to come under immense pressure when it comes to negotiating those agreements, and with Māori now probably feeling very emboldened about how much kotahitanga we were able to achieve. And it's really driving there's a new passion that's coming through, like with our future generations. So I think when we're thinking about treaty exceptions and things, like we know that there's lots of that work going on, but thinking more maybe about carve-outs as well. Like if that's in your trade policy, like start thinking about how do you carve out space so that we don't get into disputes internationally, and how do we do it better so that we can create space and allow time for us to manage our domestic issues before going to those negotiating tables. And then the other part that I wanted to talk about was just, as Dr. Tunui said, like the full potential of the Māori economy is yet to come, and we've seen it. I mean, if anyone's got a TikTok account, you see Māori on there doing incredible things, and these are our young ones, and they are just smashing it, and they are putting their culture on show for the world, and you can see where they're going. So I think when you're thinking about the Māori economy and seeing what these young ones are doing and how they're using digital platforms to promote their culture and to promote their creativity, I think that's it. That's the next level of growth in the Māori economy. And then just to kind of wind that down, to wrap this up, I think that potential, though, is really dependent on three things that Jason just said, and that's that we get the content of these trade agreements right, that we nail the process so that we don't have fights here in New Zealand among ourselves, and that we really understand what the outcome is. What are we trying to do in these trade agreements for Māori, and what do we want from them? So that's my wrap-up for it. I want to open the floor for questions. If anyone's got any questions, please raise your hand and we'll pass out the mic.
I'll do it.
Nichola.
I'll do the runner. It gets me off the spot.
Ka niti mihi kia koutou i tēnei ata i tō kōrero. Ki te whakanui te kaupapa i tēnei rā, so ka niti mihi kia koutou. The question I had was in relation to a Matariki festival that we built in Thailand last year. So that was to create a cultural lens for trade and to push into that particular market. My question is, how can trade policies be designed to facilitate that economic exchange, but also recognising cultural identity and diplomacy as a tool to kind of create better trade relationships?
Kia ora, pātai nui tēnā. Kia ora. Just recently, one of the little projects that I've got myself into is with the New Zealand with the New Zealand China Council. They're interested in how Māori engage with China, and in talking with various ones, including Rachel and others, and Ngāhiwi and others, what I discovered, or one of the things that we discovered, is this idea of cultural diplomacy. And we have to understand, I guess, and appreciate the power of culture in all its forms as a way of, I guess, developing relationships and developing understanding, developing affinity for one another, so that we're thinking about what's best for each other through the sorts of mediums that you've been part of. And so what that looks like is not just tikanga, but it's expressions of tikanga in terms of physical artefacts and exchanges of goods, things like painamu, fashion, art, artefacts, as a way of showing our aroha and manaakitanga for one another. And so one of the challenges is, how do we value cultural diplomacy as a way to establish and maintain relationships? How does policy, how does an institution like Foreign Affairs value that kind of approach to the work that you do, and who does that work? And so I think that's an opportunity, and it's important that we sort of look at that. The other aspect that is sort of highlighted from that work is, do we really know each other? And how do we perceive one another, whether that's Māori and Southeast Asia? What's our perceptions of one another? Do we really know each other? And what do we think about each other? And how do those perceptions influence the way in which we connect? Because some of the stereotypes are sort of, we're hanging on to stereotypes that maybe we shouldn't. And so we need to understand, well, what are those stereotypes? Where do they come from, and how do we change them? Kia ora.
Just to add to that, Nichola, I think that with our previous Minister of Foreign Affairs, she was starting to plant the seeds in terms of our tikanga within that foreign policy space. But unfortunately that's kind of been wound back, but there was a framework that had been introduced, and Jason, you might know this better than I would, but she was starting to introduce our tikanga as part of a framework in terms of our relations with those foreign partners.
Do we have any more questions? there.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor. My name is Jimena from Colombia. And I have a question. I'm sorry if I go back to the basics and everybody else in the room knows, but could you please elaborate a little bit more on the programs in order to support Māori business to succeed in the global arena? And if there are any reports that confirm that this support program actually work? Thank you very much.
You want me to answer that? Should we take another question first? I suppose I should return to my position. I mentioned in my presentation that there are component parts to supporting the Māori economy overall, and trade playing a role within all of that. And so there are programs across different agencies to support that capacity and capability building. And in the international trade arena, there are a number of agencies involved working alongside. We've heard examples of Potama Trust to support Māori business abroad. NZ Trade and Enterprise has a particular team there. We were very pleased earlier this year to see a Māori women's tech delegation go to Europe, leveraging both the recently concluded EU and UK FTAs, visiting both Paris, Dublin and London. There are a range of other initiatives to support Māori business, including on the implementation side. So what happens, behind the borders, addressing the trade barriers that often pop up, the new requirements, the new technical requirements, the new regulations that make trade harder. And so smoothing those out are an important part of the trade supportive program. I might just give one example around the CPTPP and the 3-year ITAG report into the CPTPP's implementation, which looked at Māori uptake as well as women's uptake. Yes, we need more data. We need more analysis. Anush spoke to this yesterday. We need more than anecdotal. We need longer term, deeper embedded programs. But that's just some of the things that are being done. Have to run again. Go to Rachel and then.
Thanks, Tane. And I just want to say that everybody here from MFAT actually has agency here. Because I know when I was sitting in Guangzhou and you have an email come through, and we've got a lot more flexibility than the NZTEs of the world, that have got a lot of KPIs and are very KPI driven, to actually be able to lean in and support. So if, for example, you've got Kiri Nathan leading a hikoi of Māori fashion designers, we can lean in and we can, look for things like public diplomacy funding, to do things like at that time we supported 100+ business delegation from Tamaki, and then we also collaborated with Guangzhou Fashion Week to have our designers on that stage, and that was the cultural part. But actually we got that money for cultural reasons, but there were very real economic and business reasons that people were a little sceptical of. But all these years later, the proof is in the pudding with people like Nichola that are still doing, even in a really tough environment, they're doing what they're doing. And they could do that through things like connections made to local Chinese manufacturers that could help them with their production cycles, etc. So we can't underestimate the agency that everybody has to actually lean in and support.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first one, is there any specific certification to identify Māori businesses in New Zealand? And the second question is that do you have any specific studies that really focus on identifying what are the key obstacles for these businesses not to have access to trade? And yeah, so do you have some study along these lines to understand the specific barriers that these businesses face when they need to access international markets?
Kia ora. Good question. There's no, the definition of Māori business, it was worked on by Stats NZ and Māori organisations a couple of years ago, and they arrived at a sort of an updated version of what that means. And the definition of Māori business for Stats, at least, is a business that identifies as Māori. So they self-identify, they choose to opt in to being counted as part of the Māori economy. Someone from that business says that the business has, the owner has whakapapa to a Māori person, so they've got Māori whakapapa, and really it's about opting in as a business. They left out ownership threshold, so normally sort of 50% or more Māori ownership of the firm is necessary, but they kind of left that to the discretion of agencies to apply a threshold that was appropriate to their work. So there's a new definition there of Māori business. But ultimately, it's if a business identifies as a Māori business, they're recognised as such, they are a Māori business. Taumata Trust, Amotai, the Māori procurement agency, they use definitions that are similar to that definition, but they have a threshold around ownership interests to ensure that there's Māori control over the firm. Probably in terms of just taking it back to the earlier question around agencies that support Māori business, Amotai, Taumata Trust, Māori Women's Development Incorporated, Māori Business Networks, and also sort of economic development agencies, including private ones, like Oyster Workshop, like Whare Huka Huka. They exist to support Māori and Pacific firms to trade internationally. And so we need to understand, well, how well are they doing? And the best sort of we can get is probably evaluation reports that are commissioned by government, funders, but what we need is sort of research that sort of verifies that. And some of the challenges are access to finance, access to support, access to, I guess, Māori international capacity to give advice, give support to Māori firms that are overseas and wanting to do business internationally. And that's one of the things that we want to look at in tauhokoko. So what works for Māori enterprises to do business internationally? And what are the metrics, what are the measures and indicators of success for those firms? And so we're using the concept of an Indigenous entrepreneur ecosystem to understand all the forms of support and what works and what doesn't, and what can we do to develop that.
I just wanted to add to just around what the specific, like there are some reports that have come out. So Burl have done a study for APEC in 2021 that looked at the Indigenous economy and some of the barriers that were faced there. Westpac and Burl also did another report looking specifically at some of the kind of ways that banking could support Indigenous businesses. And then I think KPMG do a regular a Mawiro report that kind of looked at different aspects of the Māori economy and where some of the challenges are, like at a macro level, like in terms of the iwi assets, and then right down into like what are the businesses kind of challenging and what's happening in the home to impact the Māori economy. And I think one of the ones that's come out recently was the Reserve Bank did a really great report on the Māori economy as well. And then I think some of our other agencies, like the Ministry for Women, have looked specifically at what is the role, you know, how does how, what impacts are Māori and Pacifica women experiencing in the New Zealand economy and the Māori economy. So I think there's a range of kind of reports, but I think like Jason was saying, it's like how validated and tested is that data? Most of it is kind of more qualitative. It's really just looking more to what's the feel on the ground and how is it feeling to those businesses, but the long term's definitely something where that needs greater investment. Do we have any more questions? Oh, we do.
Hi, my name's Tala. I'm with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You mentioned earlier around the hikoi and it being led by young people. Keeping in mind that obviously Māori and Pacific youth are some of the fastest growing populations in New Zealand, how do you think government, the business community can, I guess, engage with youth on some of these issues that will inevitably become their reality in future, and especially when they're not always involved in the conversation? I mean, we only need to look across the room today. I mean, not to say that anybody looks that old, but I'm just saying, a lot of young people are usually left out of these conversations, and, we think about it, we don't have a 500-year plan like Waka do, but I think as a government, sometimes we miss out youth, that youth voice in it. So I'd be interested in some thoughts around that.
I guess just one thought from myself is that from a Māori perspective, we've always been aware of our growing young, and so that's why we find ourselves in a desperate race to improve our social standing. And so, as both Jason and Tane have said, we have an increasingly successful Māori economy, but our Māori society is languishing, and so we are in a race to ensure that A, we have world-class health for our young ones, B, we have a good education system, and B, that and C, that they are included in those conversations. I mean, that's a fairly simplistic approach, but from a Māori perspective, I think we're very well aware, and that's why we are kind of pushing for those, because of that large slice of our population.
Internships for young Māori and Pacific people who want opportunities, and they might not look and feel like, they might not fit all the sort of things that you would expect to see in a diplomat, but give them a chance and give them opportunity, access to opportunity. The learning and the work that you do, and increasing the number of Māori and Pacific diplomats and foreign policy and trade policy people is really critical. So if there's opportunities for internships, placements, scholarships, all those sorts of things, they really do help. For me, as an academic, I'm focused on the next generation, so the more PhD students I can get on board and support, the better, because I can't do, can't teach and research forever. Got to hand over the rākau to someone else, to the younger generation. That's why, Carrie is doing her PhD, and I got a whole bunch of them, and more the better. So it's really important that we do provide those opportunities.
Kia ora. From an actual business point of view, I suppose for me, myself, we have an open door policy, but we also adopt a tuakana taina kind of framework, where we are often approached by schools, actual rangatahi going into entrepreneurship, looking for mentorship. We've had interns, but I think I can only talk for myself. It's really important that we do nourish these the rangatahi or the young ones coming through, because it's really important. I learnt that when I was part of another ropu at Kiri Rō Marae, our kaumātua at the time, Wikuki Kingi, he knew that his time was coming, and so he had changed, I think, his mindset at that time to actually incorporate some of us rangatahi coming through to be actually part of the process that were prior to that actually like forbidden almost in these wānanga settings. So yes, it's really important that we nourish the rangatahi coming through, and you'll see it, and you probably saw it at the hikoi, you know, they were there, they were leading, but it's for me, myself, it's always to have that open door to adopt a taina to a kind of process, and to always let them into openness and just encouraging and supporting them as much as we can.
With your business and being a business owner, going into a foreign market, what type of things would make it easier for you to do business and trade in those areas? Because I know you had trouble finding manufacturers, all of those kind of things. What kind of support would have been really helpful to kind of close that gap for you?
To be honest, initially it was information. Like, I only know what I know, and it was actually quite hard to, apart from Kiri Nathan, if she hadn't started her rōpū, her group, and we went on that hikoi that Rachel spoke about, I wouldn't have known much or anything really about China and Asia in general, because I didn't know. These things weren't open to me, and I did ask, I did inquire, I went through main channels, but I'm a small voice, I suppose, in a pool of bigger voices. So yeah, just knowing the information was the first thing. Actually building up contacts and relationships. You get further with in places, I think, once you know someone that's inside the institution that you're trying to break into. So that's definitely another point. And I think having investment in capital definitely is another part, but that information really was the main one for me. Yeah. Kia ora.
If we can all just put our hands together for our panel, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you.